see Ruthie? No, you see the ask questions using hashtag Facebook?
Yep.
Okay, mute your phones.
All right. Go on. 5, 4, 3.
Good evening, live audience and studio audience. Make some noise! Welcome, everybody, to our third live broadcast of our social media mini-series entitled Poli Sci 101. This week, you guys are in for some unique content regarding the political players of Illinois. So as we continue to break the third wall, what's in it for the Black People Media Productions is so excited to present tonight's show. But before we begin, we must lay out some ground rules. Now, we don't like to call them rules, so we'll just say group norms. Now, for our studio audience, you guys ready for your group norms? Yeah! All right, we only have 4. The first one is sit down. The second one is be quiet. The third one is if you exit, no re-entry. And the fourth one is get your questions ready. For everybody watching on YouTube and Facebook, we simply have 2 group norms for you. The first one is get your popcorn and your questions ready. And the second one is have fun. So tonight in the building, we got DJ Sonia Escobar. Woo!
She ready.
She ready. And so without further ado, let me say this. Without further ado, I know y'all wasn't expecting me to be sitting in this chair. So without further ado, for the last time, I bring you political strategist, WVOM morning show host, president of What's in It for the Black People, a house music hater, and the first person to bring original, authentic hip-hop to Chicago. And as we like to say, Maze took hip-hop corporate. So, as I relish in the fact that I get to sit in his chair, here he come walking up, looking at me, telling me to hurry up. So come on, Maze Jackson.
Thank you all. Thank you. And thank you all to our live studio audience. I want to thank you all for being here tonight. I appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule. And as well to our live Facebook audience, I want to thank you all for coming out today as well too. I am going to tell you that this has been an exciting series, and I just have appreciated all of the wonderful feedback and response, and I hope that this has been informative for you as well as much as I have enjoyed it. So let's start today's edition of Poli Sci 101. All right, back to the script. Now let me get back to my script. Good evening. My name is Maze Jackson. I'm the host of WVON's morning show, the WVON morning show with Maze Jackson and Charles Thomas. We come on every day, Monday through Friday, 6 to 9 a.m. Now join us as we take our local elected officials into what we like to call the lion's den. Rawr. The place where we like to hold elected officials accountable, ask the tough questions, but most importantly, we like to ask the question, what's in it for the black people? So many times we're able to cover stories, but we're not able to get to the root of the problem from a historical perspective. So we decided to produce this first of its kind social media mini-series entitled Poli Sci 101. What black people need to know about politics in Illinois. You see, as Chicago continues to be transformed, it's important that we as black Chicagoans remember our place in the history of this city. Not only did a black man Jean-Baptiste Point du Sable found the city, but black people have been an essential force in creating the current power structure that exists. So even as we continue to be bombarded with stories of blacks being pushed out of Chicago and constant stories of black victims, it's important that we remember our history, a history of strength, a history of black power, not the Ungawa black power, but black business power and black political power. There was a time when black Chicago represented all the hopes and dreams of black America. So how do we go from a place where black people determined our own fate to having it determined for us? From dictating terms to our politicians to having them dictate the terms to us. Join us, and how do we find our way back to our former path back to our former glory? So join us for this 4-part series, social media mini-series, What Black People, Poli Sci, What Black People Need to Know About Politics in Illinois. Tonight's episode, the political players of Illinois. Now I'm going to tell you, I found this interesting, educational, and informative. But for you, I hope that you find it enlightening. Ladies and gentlemen, What's in It for the Black People Productions presents Poli Sci 101 Episode 3, The Political Players of Illinois. Now, in our first episode, we discussed the origins of black political power in Chicago and its relationship to the traditional Democratic machine, from Oscar DePriest to Bill Dawson to Ralph Metcalf, all the way up to the death of Harold Washington. Harold Washington had died, Eugene Sawyer was selected as mayor by the city council, and after an internal political power struggle between black people that pitted Tim Evans, the progressive, against Eugene Sawyer, the machine black Democrat, they both wound up losing to Richard M. Daley, who was actually the oldest son of the original boss, Richard J. Daley. Now, in our second episode, we discussed the Daley years and the dismantling of black political power. During this time period, we saw Mayor Richard M. Daley ascend to power during a fractured black community that couldn't pull itself back together politically. Still reeling from the loss of Harold Washington, Daley was able to divide the black community and institute a series of policies and initiatives that would dismantle black power politics in Illinois for decades. But in his effort to dismantle black power politics, Daley also dismantled the vaunted Democratic machine. And in its stead rose a new type of political machine, more deadly and treacherous than any Chicago Democratic machine had ever been. They operated by a new set of rules, their rules, Daley over everybody, and they set out to control not only the city, but the state as well. In the new Daley machine, anyone within city limits could fall victim if they did not kiss the ring. And in the Daley Era, Daley was the undisputed champion of Illinois politics, ruling over the state's crown jewel with an iron hand. Now, when I talk about the state's crown jewel, I am talking about our home right here in Chicago. And while he decided that part of his strategy would be to share power as a benevolent ruler. It is against this backdrop that we begin tonight's edition. Ladies and gentlemen, What's in It for the Black People presents, once again, the political players of Illinois. Now go back with me. It's 1996. Richard M. Daley had effectively put the entire political world in a chokehold, and black people could provide little resistance. Now remember, we talked about this. Daley had cleared his path to becoming the longest serving mayor in Chicago history by 4 real key steps. The first, instituting a nonpartisan primary, insidious in nature. He converted the black millionaires from black people-made millionaires to Daley-made black millionaires. He appointed 13 of the 18 black caucus members of the city council, and he dismantled it with he dismantled the Chicago Democratic machine and replaced it with the Daley machine. Now, if you think back, I talked about in episode 2 the institution of the nonpartisan primary being one of the most insidious things that Mayor Daley did as it related to the dismantling of black power. But dismantling the Democratic machine came a close second. Now wait a minute. Did I just say that the dismantling of the Chicago machine was a problem? That the dismantling of the Chicago machine was a problem and affected Chicago, black Chicago, in a bad way? Why, you say? Because even in the most racially divided and segregated city, numbers still count. So as far back as the Chicago machine went, every mayor knew that if he wanted to win the black vote, he had to come through the black committeemen. And then in turn for delivering those votes, the black committeemen would be rewarded with city patronage in the form of jobs, contracts, and opportunities that they would in turn deliver to black people. Now you got to understand how the machine works. We hear it in our minds, and so many times we think of it as a bad thing. But during this era, during the era of the Democratic committeemen and the machine, communities were more stable. Why? Because they had precinct captains in every community, and they were getting feedback real time, all the time. Well, now, as we started to dismantle the traditional machine, black folks no longer had a pathway into city government. So in the Daley Machine, the committeemen were cut out of the process. If you wanted a job from Daley, you went directly to Daley now. No more committeemen. And without the jobs, the committeemen couldn't keep the precinct captains. And without precinct captains, the committeemen couldn't turn out the vote. Daley had effectively neutered the machine and put the power in the hands of his own groups. Now, I don't know if I've done a good job of explaining the role of the precinct captain. So let me just help you understand what that precinct captain does. The precinct captain is the alderman's representative or the committeeman's representative in the community that is typically divided up in a ward that is typically divided into 50 or 60 precincts. Each one of those precincts is then assigned to someone who has a job at the city. Their job at that time was contingent upon their ability to deliver the votes. Now, what that did was give the alderman or the committeeman real-time feedback, but also those precinct captains were the people that said, hey, there's a light out on the block. Hey, the gutters need to be cleaned up. Hey, we've got things, and they would be the people that would bring the resources, deliver the city resources from the mayor to the community. In exchange, those committeemen would go back to those people that they had served throughout the year to ask them to vote for the alderman or the committeeman, etc. Those votes would then be translated into political patronage. Well, by taking away the political patronage, those committeemen those precinct captains no longer had motivation to stay with their traditional democratic organizations. But before Daley could really do his real thing with these groups, because let me back up. Daley decided, compared to the Democratic machine, he would create his own groups. And these groups effectively were the reason that the Democratic machine went away. But before he could turn his dogs loose, he had to put to rest any potential threats from the remaining Democratic machine bosses who could still make his life difficult. So he quietly entered into some peaceful power sharing agreements with the old Democratic bosses. We'll talk about those right now. Now first, you all listen to the WVOA morning show. You hear me talk about the green team, right? Green team, everybody understands the green team. Those are our Irish brethren who occupy the south side, the northwest side, and the southwest side. And so first Daley needed to fend off any potential challenges from those. So he started local with the city and the 14th Ward Alderman Ed Burke. Now, Ed Burke, in case you all did not realize, and Mayor Daley were bitter rivals. It goes all the way back to the Jane Byrne era when Ed Burke ran against Mayor Daley for state's attorney in an effort by the Democratic machine to put the Daleys to rest. They never really recovered from that. So, but if Daley was to secure power, he had to placate Burke. Now, remember how I tell you how in our minds, we would have taken each other out. We would have fought each other. Daley instead offered, Daley realizing that Ed Burke could be his Brutus, could be the Brutus to his Caesar, decided, hey, I got an idea. why don't I give this guy give him some power? So to avoid any potential treachery, Daley made him the chairman of the Powerful Finance Committee, a role that would allow Burke to enrich his family, himself, his friends, and control how the money moved through the city. Now, he also awarded him a special perk, a security detail. See, deep down, Ed Burke always thought that he could be mayor, but he kind of just never made it there. And then with the ascension of Daley, it didn't look like he was going to ever make it. So Daley, in an effort to just make sure that he wouldn't get any ideas of grandeur, decided that he would make him almost like the mayor part 2 is what I like to call it. Burke had all the comforts. He had a big old office on the 3rd floor. Think about this, guy. He had a 5-man security detail as an alderman in the 14th ward. But it demonstrated Daley's team's their thinking in ensuring that instead of having a long and protracted war, why don't we just give this guy some of the things that he wants? It was an offer that Burke couldn't refuse. Plus, he allowed Burke to plunder the Cook County Democratic Party, and he gave him the chairman of the Judicial Committee, which allowed him essentially to control the legal system. By the time they had finished Burke's power sharing package, he was in control of the City of Chicago Finance Committee, which allowed him to control how the city's money was moved. It allowed him to make lawyers and law firms wealthy, settle lawsuits, and determine the amount of money they would be settled, control the city's bond program, and serve as the patron saint of the Chicago Police Department, a place that he occupies to this day. He also took over the Cook County Democratic Party Judicial Slating Committee, which allowed him to slate and make the judges that ruled on all of the cases that he sent to him. Not to mention his wife, the Bentley driving Supreme Court Justice. He had a lucrative property tax appeal business that negotiated property tax rebates for people who were building big skyscrapers downtown. As a matter of fact, we talked about that on the show today. Ed Burke, top Democrat, represents Donald Trump in his lawsuit against Cook County. Let me tell you, the green team is about the green, right? Black folks, I implore you to wake up. There was nothing emotional about this. This was about how did they secure the bag. Plus, remember, he also had his own around-the-clock security detail. Now, on a side note, there was another power sharing agreement that had occurred in that, and I'm not gonna spend too much time on it. But immediately after the death of Harold Washington, Wilson Frost became the finance chair. In the Daley era, the finance chair went to Ed Burke, and the budget committee went to Lemuel Austin. And that was the power sharing agreement of the time between the blacks and the whites. At that point, the Latinos were not even a point of consideration. All right, so I think that's important. But remember, Daley gave to Ed Burke his own fiefdom, his own kingdom that kept him busy so that he would never spend time taking whacks at Mayor Daley. Now, next up, Illinois House Speaker Mike Madigan. Now, Mike Madigan, little do people know, he was an understudy and looked up to Mayor Richard M. Daley's dad as almost like a surrogate father. He was a loyalist, but like Burke, he too was a Southside Irishman who wielded significant power. But Madigan had chosen to make his base in Springfield, where in the State House, where he was able to pretty much remain anonymous. But he was still a very powerful person. So when Richard M. Daley consolidated his power within the city limits, Madigan chose to build his base statewide, working tirelessly to build a Democratic veto-proof majority in Springfield. Now, by most accounts, he and Daley didn't like each other either, but they stayed out of each other's way, but worked together on things like gun control and teachers' pensions. See how that worked out for us, right? And with a figure such as looming presence as Daley, Madigan was almost always able to remain anonymous to the average voter, but he controlled almost every aspect of state government. Now, let me tell y'all, we're going to put him to the side for a little while, but trust me when I tell you he's going to come back, and when he comes back with a vengeance. And finally, as we asked what's in it for the black people, there was John Strowger, the powerful 8th Ward committeeman and chairman of the Cook County Board. Now, Strowger was elected to the county board in 1970 and to chairman in 1994. Strowger was a loyal product of the Democratic machine, and while he didn't publicly break from the machine during Harold Washington's era, he gets a lot of flack for not supporting Harold Washington publicly. But a lot of the black activists have told me as I've been doing my research that underground, he was on the team too. So I just wanted to correct that because, John Strowger catches a lot of flack for not being with Harold Washington. But again, like so many of our own people, he had to play the spook that sat beside the door, right? Sometimes you can't manage power if you ain't in the room, right? And John Strowger understood that. But unlike many other Democratic committeemen, excuse me, ladies and gentlemen. Strowger was a loyal product of the Democratic machine, and when he didn't support Harold Washington publicly, he caught a lot of flack from blacks. But it secured his relationship with the Irish and the Democratic machine. But unlike other Democratic committeemen, Strowger was able to create his own patronage army through the county. He had a plethora of county jobs that he spread out, and as an old school machine Democrat, Strowger still knew that what votes meant to Daley. So with Strowger's vote-rich 8th Ward sitting squarely in the middle of Chicago with a wealth of jobs and contracts, Daley said, I'm going to be smart and I'm going to let that go. And so he decided he would take a collaborative approach with John Strowger. Instead of taking Strowger on directly, he asked that Strowger appoint his younger brother, John Daley, chairman of the Finance Committee, ensuring that the Daleys would not take on Strowger in the future. Now, the older Daley knew that while his younger brother had aspirations to be the county board president, it wouldn't look good if the Daleys ran the county board and the city. And so he basically cut the same deal for his brother that he had given to Ed Burke, minus the security detail. And with that, but instead of an army of machine-based, let me back up. He essentially convinced John Daley and John Strowger to share power. And in exchange for sharing power, the Daleys agreed not to unleash their dogs on John Strowger. It became a symbiotic relationship, right? But instead of as Daley dismantled the Chicago machine, it was John Strowger who was our last defense. He then built the Black Army and became the point person. But instead of an army of but Daley had other plans. Instead of Chicago machine-based Democrats, Daley put together his own army, made up of political workers from city departments, neighborhood organizations, and various ethnic groups, all ready to plunder the city. It was the rise and fall, though, of one group specifically, HDO, that changed the way that politics would be done in Illinois for decades to come. That group, HDO, was the Hispanic Democratic Organizations. Now, while these groups started out harmless, they started out as small groups of political mercenaries who were sent out on various political missions. Soon, though, as they became more successful, it became obvious to the people that were participating that the Democratic machine was not the way to go. It was not the way to advance in the city as it had been in the past. If you wanted to get in, if you wanted to rise to the heights of political power, or if you just wanted to get a good promotion at your job, you needed to be Team Daley. Now, let me just go back real quick. You guys may understand, sometimes I get ahead of myself. understand that traditionally the way things worked was there was a committeeman. Remember Big Bill Dawson we talked about? Big Bill Dawson was a committeeman. The jobs used to flow into the ward through the committeeman, and the alderman was the committeeman's understudy who worked at city council, and then they had precinct captains who would go out and do their bidding throughout the ward. Now originally, that was how the organizations were set up, but Daley decided that he was going to create his own groups. Now, originally these groups came from places like the Chicago Water Department, the Department of Transportation, Streets and Sands. There were also groups based on geographic regions. There were also groups based on race. But they all had one objective: win for Daley. In exchange for delivering those votes, though, Daley rewarded them with the riches of patronage that were once reserved for the committeemen. Now, those groups used that patronage to field and grow their armies. And as these Daley mercenary armies began to grow, they quickly overtook the ward organizations who were slowly starting to be starved off of those jobs. So now if you're a Democratic precinct captain and you're out knocking on doors in the cold, but you can't seem to go to your committeeman and get the promotion, and you see the guy that's working on this independent organization, you start to say to yourself, self, I'm on the wrong team. So you move. So basically what Daley did was shift the power away from the ward organizations into these various groups that he created. Those groups then went out and started winning votes. Now, why is this important? Because oftentimes those were the precinct captains from those same areas. So now all of the people that knew all the people from your area had flipped to Team Daley, and now they were joining one of these groups. Now, if you're a committeeman, how do you sustain your organization with no jobs and no contracts? Pretty devious if you think about it. So now with all of his enemies vanquished, because now nobody has any jobs except for the 8th Ward, right, and John Strowger, Daley is now able to release his hordes on the people. With all their enemies vanquished, Daley lieutenants wanted to increase their power. But with no territory left to conquer, they soon began turning on each other. Now, as soon as that fight began internally, it became clear that there was one group that had a bloodlust for power that nobody could beat. Their leader had been trained by one of Daley's top captains and was ruthless in his pursuit of power. And he had a team that would get him there. In the process, he led the transition from Chicago being a black politically based power town to a Latino power town. His name was Victor Reyes, and he created an organization called HDO. Now, Victor Reyes was a Mexican Puerto Rican understudy of Mayor Daley's Director of Intergovernmental Affairs and best friend Tim Degnan. Now, do you all know what the Director of Intergovernmental Affairs is? For those of you that don't know, in the City Hall, the Director of Intergovernmental Affairs is the person that controls all the determines who gets the jobs and contracts. He is the mayor's political enforcer. Now, Daley's lifelong friend, Tim Degnan, had the job, and by all accounts, hey man, that dude, I've met him, let me tell you, that is not a dude that you want to cross. I don't care. I'm just telling you, respect to Tim Degnan, you don't want to cross him. Just real tough. But he had a young understudy, and Degnan was smart enough to recognize that there was a growing group of people in Chicago. See, black folks, they really wasn't getting with Daley. Remember, we still are fractured from the Harold Washington, and we're still a little bit mad. But in that time, we had raised the awareness we had brought the Latinos in. Black folks, Harold Washington brought Latinos in, and their contribution started to add up. So now, Degnan looking around, recognizing that he's probably never going to be able to fully trust black folks, because as they climb in city government and they see what's going on, they might start to get a plan to go ahead and try and take over. So Degnan, in his mind, says, you know what? If the and God help us, if the blacks and Latinos were ever able to get together, holy crap, they could overthrow us. So what did he do? He decided not to co-opt the black people, but to co-opt the Latinos. And he used Victor Reyes to do it. See, he understood that by driving a wedge between that black and brown coalition, he would be able to split up. He would be able to keep Daley in that place forever. But you also have to understand that there's a unique dynamic within the Latino community that oftentimes we as blacks don't understand. There are cultural Latinos, and then there are the Latinos that have assimilated. The cultural Latinos are the people that we still talk about, the Chuy Garcias of the world, etc. But it was the Latinos that aspired to pursue the American dream that were willing to take black folks out. And Victor Reyes was the leader of that. So when Tim Degnan decides to retire, and Victor becomes the director of intergovernmental affairs. And as he becomes the director of intergovernmental affairs, his singular goal is to make the Hispanic Democratic Organization the most powerful army in the Daley camp. So how did he do it? What he did was he started by identifying the other crews. Now let me tell y'all some of the other crews. Maybe these are some of the names that you've heard before. Maybe you've heard people like Donald Tomzak, he was in the water department. Dave Ocho, he was on the north side. The Joyces, they were in the Beverly area and the south side. Skinny Sheehan, he ran the Department of Special Events. Then you had people like Tony Purcello, he dealt with the whites in the Department of Transportation. And then you had Big Black Al Connor, who represented the blacks in the Department of Transportation. Tim Mitchell, top Daley lieutenant, he ran the Park District. And then you had people like Tommy Simmons and Ike Carruthers, who were running the west side. You had Rudy Pope, who was dealing with CHA. And then you had Terry Peterson, who had the south side. Now let me tell you, initially, Terry Peterson and Victor Reyes were equals in the Daley Machine, but they had different strategies. Terry initially was over the blacks, with Victor being over the Latinos. Now, I want to let you know, Peterson eventually became the head of CHA, and eventually he was a kind of a troubleshooter. But as Peterson built his army, he built a white collar army. He went after college educated blacks who had graduated with degrees, and he wanted to put them in places like lawyers and not doctors, but he wanted to put them in lawyers and high class executive positions, right? So he had this group of, you know, future aspiring Afrostocracy. Let's call them that, right? He wanted to get them the big $100,000 a year jobs, and he wanted to get them to work at the highest levels of city government. Reyes, he had a different strategy. See, Reyes decided to build, he said, let's think of it like this. Terry wanted to build a smart army. Victor wanted to build a big army. So while Terry was focused on putting people in high-level white-collar jobs, Victor recognized that the real strength was on the ground. And so what he did was he decided to build his army out of streets and sanitation. Now, why is it important that he did it out of streets and sanitation? Because if you're trying to elect people, city service is what they want. So he decided, he put his top lieutenant, Al Sanchez, as the head of streets and sanitation. And from there, ladies and gentlemen, they built HDO, which quickly amassed a ton of power. You see, anyone could be a street sweeper or a garbage man, and Reyes understood that the key to winning aldermanic elections was the ability to deliver services. So with the Reyes crew in charge of distributing city services, they could determine the fate of any alderman who resisted them. Imagine you the alderman and you don't do what Victor says, and the garbage don't get picked up for a month. Boy, you're in a bad spot. So what Victor would do is anybody that resisted him, he would cut them off from services. And eventually everyone would have to come in. Now, as his army became more successful, Daley kept giving him more power. And as they got more power, Victor and those guys no longer continued to respect the initial boundaries. they decided that they were going to start picking off everybody else's crew. So if you wanted to get anything done in Chicago at a certain point, you had to be a member of HDO. I don't care if you was white, black, or Chinese. If you wasn't calling yourself Hispanic, it wasn't happening. Now imagine being a black person in Chicago, and these punks got us caught, excuse me, and they got you calling yourself Hispanic. Feel kind of Toby-ish to me. Feels kind of Toby-ish to me. Well, let me tell you what. Reyes grew that army. Bro, they made millions in jobs, contracts. They empowered people. They built an infrastructure. They modeled the traditional Ward machine model and empowered and employed Latinos throughout the city. They were, without question, the biggest gang in the city, and they ran it like wild cowboys. You could be a gang member, you could be whatever, as long as you could deliver votes. Well, ladies and gentlemen, when that happened, man, they got to a point where they were so big for their britches that they were passing out multi-million-dollar contracts, and we heard of the hired truck scandal. And the hired truck scandal brought the FBI in, and it broke up the whole racket. But while the racket was broken up, Victor had already placed all of his people in City Hall. And so even though they didn't wear the name HDO, they still knew who their chief was, and they still respected him. Now, when the FBI broke up HDO, Reyes is top lieutenant as well as the director of governmental affairs. So his top lieutenant, Al Sanchez, went to federal prison, and Al Sanchez went to prison, and the Department of Intergovernmental Affairs, who was at his replacement, Victor's understudy, Robert Sorich, also went to jail. Now, Victor never wound up going to jail, but it's not, as a former business partner, it's not uncommon to see Al Sanchez stopping by on a Friday afternoon, picking up his consulting fees for, I don't know if he consulted, I don't know exactly what he consulted on, I just know he kept his mouth shut, and you just see him often a little bit. But with HDO's demise, it would have seemed that the Latinos would have been cut out of power, but no. They had a reiteration in a group called UNO, the United Neighborhood Organization, and a group called MLI, which was the Metropolitan Leadership Institute, where they taught the next generation of Latino leaders how they would work together. But in the meantime, after HDO's demise, it would have seemed that the Latinos would have been the people that were cut out of power. But like I told you, Victor had already placed his people. Meanwhile, and UNO had taken Terry Peterson's model of the white collar Latinos and created a group called MLI. Now, it's important to understand MLI's role because Mayor Daley, in his moving of black people out, cut a deal with the Metropolitan Leadership Institute that as new jobs would open up for black folks, as new jobs would open up, that group would be the first group to get a crack at those jobs, right? So as we talk about now how every time a city department opens up and somebody Latino replaces a black, it started back then, and Daley had a plan to move and to bring up Latinos, oftentimes at the expense of blacks. So if you're wondering why you haven't heard much about black people during this era, it's because we were in the process of being neutered. That's right, they were cutting them off. Black aldermen were being sentenced to jail for corruption, the projects were being torn down, and the plan for transformation was in full effect. With the exception of people like Elsie Higginbottom and Terry Peterson, black people were rendered harmless in the city, but we still had county and state. Still had county government. That brings me to John Strowger. Now, ladies and gentlemen, let me just tell you. When John Strowger was alive, I did not care for him. I did not care for him because as a young black man coming up, I had not probably paid enough dues in his estimation. and I was ready. But upon reviewing and understanding the role of John Strowger, I look back and I understand that if it wasn't for John Strowger, the Democratic machine or the party that we know, and black folks would not have been able to put so many of their young people through college and to build middle class lives. So I want to just shape that as we go because, John Strowger in a lot of cases was not given the props that he deserves. So let me go back. Now during this era, John Strowger was the undisputed black political boss. He was an old school machine Democrat who believed in the patronage system and practiced it at Cook County without a doubt. He ruled it with an iron fist. But when Strowger had a stroke and died in the middle of a spirited campaign with the good, let me do it. How does Charles do it? The good Reverend Dr. Forrest, we shall overcome Claypool. Did I get that right?
Yes.
When he died of a stroke, Chicago's black political power took a hit. You see, Terry Peterson was building a white-collar patronage army, but Strowger used the county to deliver patronage jobs that could provide jobs and opportunities for blacks at all levels. At the time, like I told you, I didn't care for Strowger, but it's only looking back that I understand what he meant to black Chicagoans. Having grown up in poverty in Arkansas, Strowger never forgot the role that government played in lifting him out of poverty, and when he had the power, he used the same to build a powerful black organization. Yeah, he used blue-collar and white-collar jobs to create a middle-class black community in 8th Ward, very much in the Bill Dawson tradition. But being a machine Democrat, Strowger also understood that to maintain power, he needed to share it. So he provided jobs, contracts, and opportunities to black and white committeemen who had been almost rendered useless in the new Daley starved era. As I look back, you can see that Strowger was responsible for keeping the remaining pieces of the Democratic machine alive. Partly, although it lost much of its collective power and concentrated the power in the hands of a few powerful political bosses who at the time were Daley, Madigan, and Strowger, with Strowger being the single black boss for black folks. Man, he was actually the only check against HDO. And because, remember, Strowger had built his own political army, but also it was a détente because Daley had already the Daleys and the Strowgers had a power sharing agreement. And honestly, the Daleys did a good job of respecting that until Strowger died. Now you got to understand, John Strowger held the political sword and shield for the black community. So when he was suddenly taken down by a stroke, the black political class stood up against any attempts by the green team. And let me tell you, when John Strowger went down, the green team was like like the zombies. They was on it. They were trying to figure out a way, how could they get that? Because why? The county was rich with jobs and contracts and patronage opportunities. But the black political class stood up and they said no. So they replaced Strowger with his son, Todd, who went on to defeat Forrest Claypool in a very narrow election and went on to defeat Republican Tony Perica in what was a heated general election. I'll remember that night because everybody marched down to the county. It was the Strowgers versus the Pericas. Boy, it was like pre-Donald Trump. Boy, I'm telling you. I think it was Antifa versus the Republicans. Something was going on. But let me tell you, by the time it was over, black Democrats had gotten their wish, and Todd Strowger was able to continue the Strowger dynasty. You see, with old man Strowger gone, all bets and all agreements in the power sharing agreement were gone. And by putting Todd into the place, the green team had honored their commitment. You see, what happened was the black committeemen, when John Strowger passed, said they had just seen Lipinski pass his job on. They had seen the Madigan tradition. And so black folks was like, well, wait a minute. How come the black people can't get a pass on and we can't pass it on? And the white folks was like, Oh, you want to pass it to Todd? We'll give you that deal and we'll outwait you for 4 years. And the second that they passed it on to Todd, they began undermining and they began a 4-year campaign to remove him from office. I will never forget going to Todd's swearing in, and the next day the Chicago Tribune had a headline that began the countdown to take Todd Strowger out. But he was during his time in office, Todd was subject to attacks by the press, he was undermined by his colleagues, and he was sold out by the people who were supposed to have his best interests at heart. Now I'm going to tell you, Todd, being a machine Democrat, he believed in the Green Team till it was too late. In 2010, after passing a countywide penny sales tax, the Green Team assumed that they had weakened Todd Strowger to the point where they could take him out and keep all the patronage jobs and contracts to themselves. So the Green Team fielded a candidate. Now think about this, y'all. The Green Team fielded a candidate against a sitting county board president. Where do they do that? That would never happen to a white person. But they felt that Todd was weak enough. And remember, they wanted those jobs. So they put Terry O'Brien, who was actually the president of the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District, as their candidate. And when Tony Preckwinkle entered the race, they assumed that it was a done deal. Why was it a done deal? 2 blacks in the race. Where have we seen this before? 2 blacks in the race and the white guy runs up the middle. Well, guess what? Tony Preckwinkle surprised them all by putting together a semblance of that old Harold Washington coalition. And by doing that, she had then wiped the Green Team, had smashed the Green Team's plans. And the Green Team threw Todd over the bus and then stepped to Tony Preckwinkle and offered her the keys to the black community. So now just think about this, y'all. The University of Chicago progressive Preckwinkle of the 4th Ward is now in control of the black part of the Democratic machine. A machine that she spent her whole life fighting and trying to break. So, Preckwinkle, while she was a dominant presence from a local policy standpoint, she really did little to increase black political power, choosing really to rely on a diverse group of educated, progressive blacks, some lakeshore liberals who can provide money and intellectual capital, but they really have limited political enforcement opportunity or protection property. They can't really protect, and they really don't have a lot of political experience. They haven't been on the ground. But Preckwinkle seems pretty much more than happy to outsource the political part and the patronage to Speaker Madigan in exchange for jobs, contracts, and opportunities that really is all he's ever interested in. Now, Strowger, where's Todd Strowger, whose father was a loyal Democratic Party member, Democratic boss? You would assume that Todd Strowger was somewhere with a big fat job and reaping the benefits of all the years and all the loyalty that his father put into the organization. No, Todd is working for $24,000 a year, trying to make his pension in an aldermanic office while the Democratic Party looks at him and leaves him out there after all the years of loyal service. But it spoke up to years. But let me tell y'all, you know who banished Todd? Who banished Todd was now, who was offended, Speaker Michael J. Madigan. Offended that Todd, when realized that the Green Team was crossing him out, decided to fire the Speaker's people. They never forgave him. They banished him. Ladies and gentlemen, now we're going to talk about the ultimate power play, Michael J. Madigan. What if I told you that after everything we talked about, there was one man left standing and that all roads lead back to him? What if I told you that there was one man in the state who can make this state go or stop? What if I told you that there was one man who controlled every aspect of our government? What if I told you there was one man who told you not to look him, who people told you you couldn't look him in the eyes? And what if I told you he could banish you from the state of Illinois if he doesn't like you? Would you believe me? Well, you should, because that man exists. And his name is Michael J. Madigan. And with Daley retiring and John Strowger passing, there is no question that Mike Madigan is the last dime, without a doubt. Until recently, he was the least known of the big bosses. But after his latest battle with multi-millionaire Republican Governor Bruce Rauner, Mike Madigan's profile has been raised. Now, let me tell you, Speaker Madigan has been Speaker since 1972. He's run with the exception of 2 years when he lost to the Republicans. He too is a property tax appeals lawyer. Where have we heard that? Right? Got rich. He simultaneously raises your property taxes and lowers them. He's created a vaunted statewide political operation that has rolled him to a veto-proof majority in the Illinois House of Representatives. His influence also reaches over to the Senate, where the Senate president is one of his understudies. It reaches to Cook County, where he's become the stick behind Tony Preckwinkle. It also reaches the Cook County Board of Tax Appeals, where its chairman, Joe Barrios, was also one of his understudies and a member of his legislature. It reaches to every board, every job, every state appointment. It's nothing for a new politician who just got to office to get a little note that says, hey, the speaker would like you to hire. Hey, the speaker would like you to consider. Now, if you don't understand when you get that note that consideration means the speaker said, you know how I say May said? That don't mean nothing. When the speaker said, it's either you do it or you don't. But if you don't, you will pay a price. But to maintain all that power over the state, Madigan simply needs to be reelected in one small Southwest Side district. For years, that area was a white ethnic area, but like a lot of Chicago, it has rapidly become Latino. Always sure to do whatever he needs to do to win and maintain power, Madigan has wholeheartedly adopted a Latino inclusion plan. Remember UNO? Those guys that came up after HDO? He got them $112 million to build new schools. Build 5 new schools because Latinos were overcrowded. At the same time, a year later, closed 53 schools in the black community. Remember that guy Victor Reyes in HDO? Well, after Daley dumped him with the federal investigation, Madigan picked him up and made him his top underboss for the Latinos. Make no mistake, Madigan is the king of the green team, but he's adapted a pro-Latino power strategy, accommodating Latinos in his district and throughout the state. So where does that leave black people in the current power dynamic? For the most part, left out. The old gatekeepers are aging out, and their crab-like mentality did not allow them to build a next generation of leaders. So it left a power vacuum in the city, county, and at the state level. Gone are the big-time ward bosses like Metcalf and Oscar DePriest, and they have been replaced by meek people with limited money to deliver the votes. Once the most powerful jobs in the Democratic Party, the committeeman has become a thankless job, with many grumbling that it doesn't pay and it's not worth it without the jobs. Heck, it used to be a badge of honor for committeemen to deliver the votes. Now, because they knew that those votes would translate to jobs. Now, turning out votes has become a fundraiser for the committeemen. And also an opportunity for the party to shake down candidates. After the rise and fall of HDO, Mayor Daley realized that the power of being in control of city services, and he developed the 311 line. So which in many cases allowed people to circumvent their aldermen in the delivery of city services. Placing the power in the hands of the mayor's people. He centralized. Combine that with 13 of 18 of the black caucus being appointed by Mayor Daley after a loyalty oath to the mayor, a tradition that Rahm Emanuel has kept alive, and you'll see that most aldermen find it better to get along with the mayor than fight City Hall. And for the most part, it's paid off. Gone are the policy kings and independent black businessmen who financed everything from black startups to the campaign for the first black mayor. They've been replaced by black business associations such as ABLE. If you watched the show this week, you saw Hermine Hartman when she told us that they weren't fighting for black people. They were fighting for their own business, for their own associates. You see organizations like ABLE, the Business Leadership Council. Gone is their concern for their black customers, and the black community, their new concern is the selfish growth only of their own businesses. In exchange for the businesses, they've promised to keep black folks in check. Well, at least we have Springfield, right? With the Black Caucus being the largest caucus in the General Assembly. Nope, not actually. Because even though the Illinois Legislative Black Caucus is the biggest caucus in Springfield, they've been reduced to, as they tell us, blocking bad bills and protecting the safety net. If you doubt me, just think, to get that $112 million to build those new schools, every black legislator signed off on a letter to do it for a $75, I'm not going to say for a $75 meal, I'll say at a $75 meal. Meanwhile, we're still waiting on that $500 and $500 million weatherization bill that they've been talking to us about. So it's the epilogue. Where are we? It's 2017, and blacks in Chicago are at one of our lowest points ever. Politically, there's no one willing to stand up to Mayor Rahm Emanuel. So even after witnessing Laquan's murder, we're still having trouble fielding a black candidate for mayor or governor. Our elected leaders apparently want to die in power, so they refuse to make way for the two restless generations, the X's and the millennials, who are not only frustrated with the system, but frustrated with our elders. And black business community is with the man. And I mean, they are with the man, not the black people. The education of our children is the #1 pipeline to the Illinois Department of Corrections. And we can't tell whether some of our ministers are worshiping God or the man. Yeah, I like that one. I'm going to have to use that. Meanwhile, most of the power players that we talked about, the white and Latino power players that we talked about, are still doing their thing. Mayor Daley, he's getting rich with the same firm that he gave the parking meter deal to and bringing Chinese people over here. Alderman Burke is still the dean of Chicago City Council. He's still selecting the judges, and right now he's in the process of suing. Think about this. He is in the process of suing Cook County for President Donald Trump. Mike Madigan, well, he's the boss of bosses now. Maybe even more powerful than the Daleys, than all the Daleys combined. I doubt we would have even ever known about the power of Mike Madigan if it wasn't for Bruce Brown and all these dang on TV commercials. Man, and I'd also recommend that if you want to know more about Mike Madigan, check out that movie Madigan. Woo, that's deep. Then there's the Hispanics. Victor Reyes from HDO has gone on to found the Roosevelt Group and the Reyes Curson law firm, and they are making millions due to Madigan basically making Reyes the king of the Latinos. Terry Peterson, he remained faithful to the end, a go-to guy for the mayor even to this day. He went on to lead CHA, and after Philip Jackson took the fall for the destruction of the projects. He went on to be a political troubleshooter, known for being able to make the connections. He's doing well with the big job and about to retire. But when we last ran into him, he told me, he said, "Hey, Mays and Charles, I'm thinking about changing to independent because I haven't seen the benefit from the black community." I don't know if I'm allowed to say that, so Terry, I apologize if I wasn't. We are now at the point where blacks are no longer the preferred minority in Chicago, and every day we see indications that blacks continue to be replaced in city government by Latinos. So although Juan Rangel and Uno have broken up, they still have a legacy of those schools standing up and the replacement of jobs. And where does that leave us? Where does that leave us as black people? It leaves us asking the question of everybody. What's in it for the black people? Ladies and gentlemen, watch our next episode, Rebuilding the Black Infrastructure, to see how black people can reconstitute and rebuild our community and maximize our power. Not our Ungawa black power, but our economic and political power. And find out how you can join the What's in It for the Black People movement. Until next week, I'm Mays Jackson, and I want to thank you for joining us for Poli Sci 101. Thank you very much. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I want to let you know, stay tuned. Your questions will be asked and answered via Facebook Live. Coming in, joining me now is Miss Ruth Ann Moe. And while we're doing this, do you mind if you could KM, could you pass me my drink now that I'm here? Ruthie, ladies and gentlemen, welcome Miss Ruthie.
Wait, I don't get to sit in your chair no more?
You better get that chair. Ladies and gentlemen, do y'all mind if I take this jacket off? Because I'm here to tell you it is cooking. It is hot, and I am burning. I'm like a hunk of burning. Oh, I got my cool microphone on. I can't do it. I'm mic'd up. All right. Y'all, we fancy round here.
If you have any more questions, please ask them using the hashtag Poli Sci 101.
Did you guys enjoy the conversation? Was it informative? You know, I have learned so much in doing this research, and I look forward to putting this all online and making it available. And I also look forward to letting you all, I want to encourage everybody to come back next week because we'll tell you how you can be a part of the What's in It for the Black People movement. Ruthie, so it's good to see you, man. Young lady. So talk to me. What we got? Do we got questions? Y'all ready?
Absolutely.
All right.
We have questions. So, Maze, I have divided up these questions so we can sort of start off with history.
History.
So, regarding the history of the wonderful information that you implored upon us, Maze, can you please expound upon the rich history of Chicago and why that is so important to Black people?
I mean, I think that when you look at the rich history of Chicago, you know, you talk about the Harlem Renaissance and you hear about all these things, and you know, people like to act like New York was the spot. But when you take a deep dive into the history of Chicago and you realize what Black people were able to achieve here in spite of the institutional racism, it is not only important, it's inspirational. And I think it's important for our young Black kids to know, like, as you drive, I mean, you gotta understand, when we're driving through this city and you drive past the historic Defender building, when you drive past Ebony Jet building, when you drive through Bronzeville and you see the Supreme Life building and you know that they wrote $100 million in life insurance policies there when Black people couldn't get insurance, it is just, the history of Black Chicago is just so dynamic and awesome, and it's just important that we share.
Okay, so a comment related to that came from Facebook.
What's up, Facebook?
Terry Ellison said, "We have a rich history. That's what we need to be proud of. Not our clothes nor cars. The strength that our ancestors had to strive against insurmountable obstacles." So, in keeping along with history, Maze, you talked about some of the Black political power players. And there was a little bit of debate going back and forth on Facebook regarding William Frost.
Woo.
And so can you expound upon William Frost and his role in Black political history?
Power broker. So it's not William, it's Wilson Frost.
Wilson Frost.
Okay, and so it's Wilson Frost. Wilson Frost was the powerful alderman from the 34th Ward. I believe Mr. Frost is still alive and still providing political insight. You know, he was a machine guy and he knew how to maneuver. He was also the finance chair. He was agreed upon as the finance chair. What I would say is that Wilson Frost was probably one of the most influential behind the scenes players. And actually, he was offered, it's funny because he was actually the first person that was offered the position of being mayor instead of Eugene Sawyer, and he refused it and instead chose the finance committee.
So Lori K. Westerfield from Facebook wants to know, was William Frost the mayor for a few days when Richard J. Daley passed?
No, it was David Orr.
Okay. You ready for our next question, Mace?
Yes.
So, Keith Harris from Facebook wants to know, how could you go directly to Daley when he had buffers?
I mean, how could you go directly? Well, that's what I meant. You had to go to Team Daley. So you had to find a Daley conduit, right? So you could join Terry. Terry was a path to Daley. You could join Victor. He was a path to Daley. You could join the water department. That was a path to Daley. When I say you had to go directly to Daley, I didn't mean the mayor himself, but I meant his organization.
Okay. So our next question comes from Facebook also.
And Keith, I hope you ain't asking me that question mad, man. Because you know Keith is like the maddest. But I'm going to tell you, I appreciate you, Keith, all the time.
So, Terrence Bay wants to know, Maze, how much is your book gonna cost? And can we get a discount for being early adapters?
Adapters or adopters?
Okay, he didn't say that. I had that.
Ah, you had that. Okay. Look, so let me say this. There are multiple chapters that are written. They just are not in order and they are not organized. I have been on myself to write a book, and I got a couple different ones in me. I got an autobiography, I got a political book, and then I have a collection of essays and thoughts. It is really, guys, I don't know if I've expressed this, but it is really having the confidence to actually release it. Or to put it together and release it. But I think as I continue to build up an audience and a base, and if you all are interested in it, then it may come out sooner than later. And yeah, you can get a discount. You get the Wiftable discount. That'll be your code.
Okay, so our next question comes from YouTube.
YouTube, what's up, YouTube? I'm telling y'all, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Go ahead.
The No PC Show.
No PC Show, what's up, man?
All right. So he says, so Victor created a voting block which Daley supported for votes on the back end. What happened to the Black and Brown Alliance?
So the Black and Brown Alliance was, remember I told you they went and intentionally drove a wedge. So right now, in the Latino community, they have cultural Latinos, which are the people that still want to be like La cucaracha, they want to teach it, they want to have Mexican heritage, etc. Then there are the like what I like to call the corporate Latinos, or those that have assimilated and they want to live the American dream. They want their piece of the pie. Those are that 1/3 of people that vote, Latinos that you heard about, that voted for Donald Trump. They are no longer Latino, they are Americans. Victor, that is a stronger growing body that is interested in grasping power. The cultural Latinos always talking kumbaya, so it's like the cultural Latinos are like, they came to a knife with a gunfight, right? Victor and them are like, look, man, we taking all that, we want all that. The cultural Latinos want to share, but even if you pay attention to just this last election cycle, even Chuy Garcia, the king of the cultural Latinos, sided with Madigan.
Okay. So, Mace, before we jump into today, we have one more question related to history.
Okay.
And that is from Quentin Lewis via Facebook.
What up, Quentin?
He wants to know what about the role of Emil Jones, and what role was that in the political landscape of Chicago?
So, let me say this. I wrestled back and forth with the Emil Jones. How much should we put in there? And I think that at some point I may even ask to interview him. I think that in the landscape of time, let me say this. Emil Jones he was like a supernova, right? So he had about a 4-6 year run where him, Blagojevich were there, but I felt like his power was tied to Blagojevich, right? They teamed up to fight Madigan. Now, let me say that Emil Jones was our black stick during that time, but I don't know if he was able to create a legacy, right? When he was gone, they kind of took down everything about him. We still remember him, but it was kind of like, my premise with him was, brother, you left us kind of high and dry with nobody. But he did, when he was in the spot, he did build up Chicago State, even though we only got $110,000 worth of contracts. And I know all the green team were the people that had the contracts to build it and everything, but it is a really pretty campus. Maybe they could get some parking, and I know that he did hook up his son with a $25 million contract. So I'm just saying, how many of that did we see get to the community? That stated, Emil Jones was a G for black folks, right? But again, the problem is that a lot of our old bosses came from a political system that was old boss political system. And so the young people who came up didn't want to play that game, so they didn't want to wait their turn.
Okay. So,
and actually, let me just say this: we had a chance to replace Emil Jones with another black Senate president, which would have had some continuity, but there were black legislators who voted against the black legislator because they were offended that he was chosen by Emo Jones. One of your current chairman of the Black Caucus. She's proud of it too. Yeah, go ahead.
All right. So, Maze, our Facebook audience is so in tune. They're always talking about, well, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? So, some of our questions, the next series of questions are related to that.
Okay.
So, the first one is, Reese Mo wants to know,
Reese Mo!
is the Madigan movie on Netflix?
No, but I believe you can get it on Comcast, and I think if you go Google it. I know Comcast had it on, like, their on demand, but you can Google it, and I'm sure that if I reach out, I can get a copy of it. I almost might want to do a screening of it.
Awesome. Okay, so our next question comes from Susan Peters from Facebook.
Susan, now I told you, Susan, the University of Chicago gonna get you. Go ahead.
So she wants to know, why are black politicians trying to die in office? Hashtag pass the torch. What do you think about that, Maze? Okay, she didn't hashtag, I added that.
Because we have a lack of black infrastructure and we do not have a system. Right? White folks, this is how it works if you're in politics. You go to school, you get an internship, or you work in somebody's office. You work there, they work you like a slave while you're 22, 23, 24, 25. Then they get you a job. They tell you while you're working on the government payroll, go get a law degree. They get you a law degree. Then once you get the law degree, then they either connect you to a law firm, and then you go off to make millions of dollars because you did your service. Then if you decide you want to run, you run. You work there for years and years and years. Then you step out, and then you anointed your replacement. You give your replacement all of your knowledge, and you guide them through the process. You then go on and make money so that you can support the person that you left. We don't have a system like that because we haven't built any black wealthy businesses where you can go retire, right? So there are no places for black folks to leave. So what's Danny Davis gonna go do? No disrespect to Danny Davis, but I mean, you're a congressman. If there's no chairman emeritus job for him, like if you're a white guy and you're in that space, they make you the chairman emeritus of Chicago State, and he gets to be the big guy. We do not have a political system that exists. There are multiple paths out for white folks. For us, we don't have it. So if you are used to getting free chicken dinners and being able to be a star, you don't want to give that up if you ain't gonna have no money. Mm-hmm. So the fact of the matter is, and so I think about when we talked to remember I talked to Danny Davis and he was like, who gonna beat me? Well, ain't nobody gonna be able to beat Danny Davis. His name is legendary. Bro, you done put it down. It's gotta be not who's gonna beat me, who is going to be my legacy. What is my legacy? See, we haven't learned legacy, but again, black folks still suffer from a generational curse, right? And in Chicago, it's intense. So you just got to understand that. And what we got to do is start creating the opportunities where he want to leave because he going to make $250,000 a year doing nothing like these white folks do.
Okay. So when you started talking about how Tony Preckwinkle took out Strowger, that was a flashback for the audience. And so people want to know more about why isn't John Strowger given his credit?
Todd Strowger.
Todd.
Okay, so let's back up. Todd had the only balanced budget in the country at the time. But it goes to perception. Todd looked little, and they were able to take advantage of that. Todd was a get along kind of guy. He wanted to make we got people that like to fight, and then we got people that like to figure out how to work together. Well, while Todd was trying to figure out how to work together, they was fighting. Why doesn't he get his props? Because when the media shapes you, right? It's only now after looking at how bad you thought Tony Preckwinkle was gonna be something, and now it's only after looking back and you like that penny wasn't so bad. So hindsight is 2020.
Okay. And so our next question comes from Sydney from Facebook.
What up, Sydney?
He wants to know whose money did Tony Preckwinkle use to take him out?
So Tony Preckwinkle the liberals love her. Love her. So when you talk about, okay, first of all, she's got the University of Chicago, right? That is the economic, right? That's an economic school. So there's money there. She represents them in the Fourth Ward. But that also connects her to very wealthy Jewish money. So when you start thinking about the Lester Crowns of the world, when you start thinking of the Fred Eichenayers of the world, when you start thinking of the Illinois political Illuminati, that is the perfect candidate that they like. She's black, but she's not really that black. She does not uncomfortable black, right? So she doesn't make them uncomfortable. And, you know, I will never forget. I'll never forget when Tony Preckwinkle got elected, and I went to the COAL meeting. It's the Coalition of African American Leaders. They meet at BJ's Market, and it was right after she got elected. And she came in, and she got there late, and she basically, and they were asking her, what are you going to do about this and contracts and jobs and blah, blah. And she basically was like, I didn't get my money from you. And so since I didn't get my money from you, I don't really owe you anything. And I'll never forget it because I always thought of her as this progressive, nice lady, and then like school teacherish, but still like a, right, like, and when I heard that, I was kind of like, wow. Wow. And so when you look at how the cuts and stuff went down, it makes sense.
Okay.
But you know, white folks are always willing to finance somebody that's going to take on a black person.
Okay. So switching gears a little bit, Maze, we have a question from YouTube.
You Tizzle, what's up?
Buffalo Bill Jr.
BBJ, what up, dog?
All right. He wants to know, can Erica Harold change the game in Illinois?
Man, we was just talking about this.
Can you tell us who that is first, Maze?
Who?
Erica Harold.
Erica Harold is the Republican Illinois Republican candidate for general. What is it, for Attorney General? So let me say this. I. So this is my thought. If I had a daughter that was a Miss America and graduated from Harvard, that kind of would be the dream. Right? I don't know how the party, and black women are 60% of the Democratic electorate. Who says vote against her because she's an R? Right? Like, in this climate, with everything that's going on for black folks, with Ed Burke representing Donald Trump, who tells black people not to vote for her? So I think that Erica Harold is in a very good position. She doesn't have a person running against her, right? And she's got all of Bruce Rauner's money. And so I guess that Bruce Rauner, if I'm Bruce Rauner, I'm spending $10 million doing Erica Harold commercials right here in Chicago because every bit of that helps. And you put her up against a Kwame in the era of a Me Too, with all these women mobilizing. Hey y'all, this could be real interesting. I'm just gonna say it. I'm sorry, it's interesting. And I was on the phone with a top Democratic strategist on the way here, and he was like, "Man, I don't know how Erica Harold loses." It was crazy. And I was like, and we was going through the scenarios, and we was like, "Dang." Right? So, yeah, I think she has the potential. That's not an endorsement. That is just looking at the political realities and looking at the fact that the Democratic Party has been playing us. They've been playing us. And so now you got a black candidate that's a Harvard educated, that could just be your protest vote. Right?
Right.
Attorney General can't hurt you. They ain't got no prosecutorial powers. And I tell you what, if she won, I bet you everybody else would be thinking, but I'm going to tell you who we need to be. Let me just say who, black folks, this is just a shameless thing, we really need to be looking at Susanna Mendoza. Like, black folks, we need to really be looking at Susanna Mendoza, because when has she ever been a friend of our community? That's a race we need to look at, and it don't hurt us. But we'll come back to that. I might do a whole podcast on that one. Go ahead.
Okay, so our next question comes from Shanika Finley from
Shanika!
Facebook. She just simply says, how about the Shaws?
So, I like the Shaws.
Good question.
Right? Let me say this. About the Shaws, they kind of was in that same, their time passed. I like the Shaws. You know what I like about the Shaws besides the toupee? What I like about the Shaws besides the toupee was their willingness to, I just enjoy black folks that's willing to just say some outrageousness, right? That just willing to just blow up the whole, that just make white folks uncomfortable. So you know I like the Shaws, except for this chump is running against my wife right now. But I enjoy the Shaws because I just like the fact that they just make people uncomfortable. I just think can we make some white people uncomfortable? Like, can they just not see us always smiling? I enjoy that about the Shaws. So that's what I think about them.
Okay. You ready for the next question, man?
Yeah.
All right. So, this question comes from Facebook. Can you tell us some of the menu items at some of the meetings when our black elected officials sold us out?
Menu items.
The food menu items.
Y'all stupid.
Okay.
I'm not.
Let me give you a real question.
Please, but I was gonna say chicken. Always go with the chicken.
Okay. So
Fried chicken.
all right. That's the studio audience, everybody. So, after Daley shifted the power to the ward organizations,
Away from
the ward organizations, what power today do aldermen have?
You know what? Aldermen have the power of zoning. The power to control zoning, how high buildings can go, what their usage can be. The problem is, in a lot of cases, the development isn't there for them to use it. Now, what we see right now is a push to take that away from aldermen. Mm-hmm. The problem is now the development is finally making its way to the black areas. So when you talk about South Shore, now you want to take away the right to control the zoning because it's a black alderman and you got to build all this stuff for the Chinese and everybody else that's coming to take over. So guys, we got to be very careful when we hear these things, because right now everybody's like, oh, do you think the alderman should have the ability to zone? Well, if the what's in it for the black people mentality can become the mindset, then hell yeah, I want us to have the right to zone. I am so concerned that black folks will give up all of the keys that make us successful in an effort to take out somebody, that by the time we do reclaim our power, there will be nothing left. So I'm going to just tell you all straight up too. I am a believer in the patronage. I am a believer in the old machine way of doing it when your work matched your output, right? I'm not for the way that it works now. When you think about it now, I think about people that are sitting in this audience. And when we had strong committeemen, and man, maybe you had a busted cousin or a busted brother and they got their life together. And you could go walk into the ward office and say, my brother is right now. Yeah, maybe he busted into some houses. Maybe he did something, but he's straight now. Can you help him? And he gets a job as a janitor and he's able to make his life. Well, now we don't have that. Right? We don't have anybody that you can talk to, that you can tell that story to. So while the machine had its problems, it also had its benefits, and it stabilized communities. Because as people were working, as they was plugged, you had a way to pull them in. To say, hey, we all know somebody that was plugged with the organization but had a crazy brother or a crazy somebody. But if we had the relationships, man, maybe you could say, okay, he's 12 years old and he didn't make it. Your Honor, can you help him? You know, I did circulate your petitions, right? But again, you say you laugh now, but those were the relationships that in some cases saved a lot of our kids. So I want us to understand that patronage is not a bad thing because it at least gave us our piece of the pie. I'm sorry.
Okay, so Maze, I want to read 2 comments to you, and then I want you to sum up and take us to next week.
Okay.
So, Susan Peters from Facebook says...
You gonna get in trouble from University of Chicago.
But this is a good one, though. She said, when will we get our people organized? And the second comment comes from Von Rowland. He says, folks, we have to pull
people.
You don't like folks?
Man, you can tell, you know Chicago. You know what? You can tell in Chicago because half the people be like, what's in it for the black people? And others be like, what's in it for the black folks? And I'll be like, oh yeah, I know about you. Go ahead.
All right.
Because it ain't no F nowhere in there.
He said that
it is.
We have to pull our financial resources and fund aggressively political astute campaigns that are for the betterment of our community. Take us home, Maze.
Take us home. Susan, we are organizing now. The reason that we are doing this What's in It for the Black People series is to open your mind to the possibilities and to understand our history. So when we talk about organizing, it starts here with education. When you look at all of you all that have subscribed to the broadcast, ideally in our next week, you'll be here and we'll tell you how you can join our movement of What's in It for the Black People. We need to aggressively fund campaigns and candidates, but I think we need to make sure that we need to inform, educate, and bring them up to speed. One of the things that I think that everybody thinks in this world of social media is that they've got this microwave mentality, that they think that, oh, I posted on Facebook or I posted somewhere and now I'm going to get these people and pay attention. Well, no, I tell people all the time, there's no substitute for hard work, which is why we've got to train our people on how this system and this process works. As it relates to what we're doing, and when you say take it home, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to tell you, the thing that I'm the most excited about after doing this series is next week's episode. Now, I'm going to tell you I'm getting in trouble because next week's episode is actually on my wedding anniversary. So I got to make that up to my wife. And y'all going to have to help me make it up to my wife. But I think my wife gets it too. Next week's episode is going to be about rebuilding the black infrastructure. So we've talked about everything that's happened, everything that has been done to us, but how do we get it back, right? I presented this plan to Minister Farrakhan. I presented this plan to various multimillionaires in the world. Everybody gets and agrees with it, but a lot of people don't want to take it because it means that we would have to take on some of the existing power structures and the people that we talked about. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us tonight. It is Poli Sci 101 Episode 3, Political Players of Illinois. We'll be back next week. Tune in to the WVOM Morning Show tomorrow. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you to my live studio. Thank you to Facebook. Thank you to YouTube. Thank you to you, Ricky Moore. Thank you to everybody that helped put this together. And we'll be back next week. Peace.
Excellent show. Excellent show. Excellent show. Good energy all the way through. Man.